What's going on, everybody? Emceemur here, and welcome back to another video. This is going to be a unique one, okay? Something I've been working on, all right? And I fell down what I like to call a retro rabbit hole the other night. Just this flood of memories that led into a flood of experiences, and I've just got to share it with you today. I've been doing a little study, neurologically speaking, on nostalgia triggers, music, food, things that trigger certain nostalgic gaming memories and how they're connected. And that's different for everybody, of course, depending on your personal memories and experiences in gaming. But long story short, I triggered a memory the other night inadvertently, all right? And let me give you a little bit of the backstory. I'm sitting there playing Zelda 2 on NES, right? I play the NES Zeldas all the time. And oh my God, I walk into the village here. I'm just starting the game out and I'm just checking out the scene. And I just zoom in, I focus in on this one villager, this one sprite. It just triggers this recall, this memory. It just comes flooding back into my mind. Not of anything from Zelda. I mean, it's completely unrelated. Or is it? I see this little green beret dude, this little soldier guy, right? And I know instantly it's a Commodore 64 game that I had, that I loved, that I played a lot of. I'm immediately 8 years old again in my mind, in my old living room. And I'm like, what is that? I can't even think of the name of this, but I played it like crazy. And I'm racking my brain. All I know to do is to keep playing Zelda, and hopefully it'll come to me. I knew the guy's name was the name of the game, but I couldn't think of his name. Is it Commando Fred or Army Joe, or I don't... And then it hit me. Bazooka Bill. I threw the controller down. Bazooka Bill! I jumped up, ran out of the room. It was Bazooka Bill. Yes, I'm wearing the t-shirt. I had one made. Bazooka Bill. We're all about some Bazooka Bill now. Now I'm on a Bazooka Bill kick. And a Commodore kick to go along with it. But that wasn't where it ended, all right? From there, we ended up getting a ROM to re-experience this game after 35 years. And through the miracles of modern technology, I find the creator of this game, the man behind Bazooka Bill. And he agreed to an interview, and I can't thank him enough for having done it. And I just got to share it with you. Buckle up. Let's do this. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, Emceemur here, and I am privileged to be here with Mr. Clive Barrett of Bazooka Bill fame. That's right, the man, the myth, the legend that put this game together. So, man, I just got to tell you, first of all, thank you so much for being here tonight to discuss this and to answer some questions about this. I can't believe I'm actually getting this opportunity. And yeah, man, I've just got so many questions. The first thing I kind of want to...
It's my pleasure to be here, and yeah, go ahead, hit me with some of the questions. And I never thought anyone would interview me about Bazooka Bill.
Oh man, yeah. Well, here I am, Emceemur coming at you. What I want to know is, when and how did you become a game developer? What got you into the business?
Yeah, right. That's a good question. And well, back in 1976, I think it was, I built my first computer. Well, then I built another computer. So I started building computers. So electronics was my game. And a friend of mine used to show up all the time and said, Clive, you should build a computer, build a computer. So I did. And then, my first computer was lights and switches, 256 bytes of memory. That was it. And so I made this computer, but then I didn't know what to do with it because I didn't know anything about computer programming.
Right.
So I went to the library, which was around the corner from me, and there was a book there on microprocessors. I was at a point where, so back then, because there were no computers floating around back then, everyone thought I was the mad scientist. I think I even got that label for some time there. And then, a few people would tune in, and I ended up going to university and studying electronics and mathematics and computer science. But I had a business at the time. I was importing knitwear from South America, actually. Alpaca gear, bring it into Australia and selling it. And had a good business, making a lot of money, and that paid for my university education.
How about that?
And then what happened was the Australians, and I could import this stuff because it was handmade, duty free, but then Australia had a wool glut. They weren't selling their wool overseas, and Australia was built on the back of sheep, they reckon. Anyway, so the government put quota on me, and I couldn't import enough knitwear to make a living. And so I had to quit uni. I had 2 kids at the time and a wife and a mortgage. And so I had to quit university before I finished my degree. This girl who knew about my computer work came to me and said, I'm working for this guy that is looking for people to write programs for games. His name was Fred Milgram.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the first and only guy in Australia that was doing anything like writing games back then. So I went in there and saw him, and he straight away said, come in and work for me. And he gave me the keys to the office. That's what it was like back then. Yeah. And so, and then said, here's the computers. And he actually set me up with a computer, a Tandy, TRS-80 Tandy machine, I think.
Wow.
Back then.
Yeah, that's a good name to kick around.
Yeah. So he sat me down and he said, here's your brand new TRS-80 with the 8.5-inch floppies and stuff. And we bolted on the side of it a 5 megabyte hard disk, which to me was like, man, this is pretty phenomenal. And then he said, okay, write some games. And so we sat down, and first of all, I started writing like graphics, graphics programs, and because in those days we were trying to work out how to make things run smoothly, and you have to use the flyback on the graphics chip to make sure you were writing before the flyback on the screen and stuff. So we created all this stuff, and then slowly started making games. And I think the first game I made for Fred was Sports Hero. The first proper game I made for Fred was Sports Hero on the Sinclair Spectrum. So Z80 based stuff.
Sports Hero. Okay.
Yeah, on the Sinclair Spectrum. Yeah, back in those days, man, it was interesting because when I first started working with Fred, there was a few very clever programmers there, young guys. There was no artists back in those days. We used to do our own art, but then artists started to appear. There's one artist, he appeared, and he was battling with trying to work out how to put together critters, and with these pixels at the resolution they were at. It was pretty phenomenal. And I was sitting there trying to make them move around on the screen and hanging on to their color and stuff like that.
Right.
In the end, we came up with, Sports Hero, which was one of the very early sort of programs where we could use the Sinclair Spectrum and carry color. And it was pretty hard to mask everything off, but we got it up and running and we got it working. And but that's where I really started. At Melbourne House, that company was called Melbourne House. They created a lot of games, man, back then. It was the beginning. We even had the Japanese over there in Australia trying to work out how to get things going for them on some of their Japanese computers, which they had the Japanese PC. I can't remember what it was called now. So we did, everything was assembler. So we would cross-assemble everything. So say on the Tandy, you would have a cross-assembler running Z80 machine code software. And we'd compile it that way. And before I came along, the guys to get it into the Spectrum, they would feed it in through the tape input, which is how you used to store stuff on a cassette tape.
Right.
You'd write some code and then you'd feed it down into the port serially through that cassette port. And then I came along and I created this other little program so that this little electronic board, so you could feed the information in through the parallel interface that was on the back of the Sinclair Spectrum, which made things a little bit quicker, but it was still a slow process. But in the end, we got it done. I mean, we worked our way around those things because there was a lot of passion back then.
I imagine so, yeah.
To get these games up and running. And then Melbourne House took off with, Lord of the Rings was huge. That was what really kicked Melbourne House off. a pretty good game, Lord of the Rings, an adventure game, basically, based on the book by Tolkien, licensed and everything. So that's how it all started, Andy, back then. And then Bazooka Bill came along after. It was probably a year or two later after that I left Melbourne House, because these guys that I knew actually came to me and said, "Clive, we want to make a computer game." And I said, "Well, it's not that easy. You need artists and, people that can plan things out, developer type minds." And in the end, I said, "Okay, we'll do this." I said, "Well, you need marketing people and this and that, and I can put together a team." And so I left Melbourne House. I remember they gave me a bottle of scotch and said, "We'll see you again one day, Clive, probably." And off I went. And I spent 10 months, and we made this game for the Commodore 64. It was called Piracy. There's a website that's been around for years, Commodore 64 Lemon or C64 Lemon or something like that. You'll see Piracy on there. So anyway, for 10 months, I sat there and created this game called Piracy, which wasn't my design, but I did all the software. I taught these guys how to draw, showed them how to use the software. We had a musician guy there. It was all paid for by some venture capital guy. I think he put in 40 or 50 grand.
Wow.
Yeah, he put a lot of money, and I got paid. I was the only one, actually, that got paid. They paid me every week, these guys, which is pretty good.
And that was a lot of jack back then. That's some major cash.
Yeah, it was. This was about 84 or 5. And I was learning to fly at the time too, so I wanted to be paid because every weekend I'd go off and fly.
Oh, right? Man.
So anyway, so I sat there and they rented a house and I was there pretty much most of the day and night. This is probably the beginning of my divorce, to be honest, right? But I sat there 10 months there, and then in the end, then we got this game together, and it was pretty good. It was a pretty cleverly put together game, if I must say so, just because of the skills I'd learned from Melbourne House, how to tune things in and use the sprites and use the system, the C64. I'd never written a C64 game for Melbourne House. I was strictly Spectrum guy there. But so this is my first C64 game, really. As soon as it was finished, then it was up to these marketing guys to go out there and flog this game and pay back the venture capitalist guy, and hopefully we could make some money ourselves. There was 4 of us, the artists and the developers and myself. Anyway, they just couldn't. They didn't know what to do. Well, I mean, it would have been hard to do back then to sell a game. There were some people out there that could get behind it, but they didn't know how to do it. So in the end, I said, "Look, go and see Fred Milgram." This is the guy I worked for at Melbourne House. He was a great publisher. I even wrote books for Fred that he used to publish, books on machine code and assembly language, stuff like that. And so they went down and saw Fred, and I happened to show up there because I was still doing some work for Fred on the side, and I happened to show up this day for some reason. I didn't realize that they'd actually had taken me up on it because they had no other leads. So they went and saw Fred and showed him the game. When I walked into his office, he was there sitting there with these guys, and they were looking at Piracy. And Fred, from what I hear, I mean, I didn't get involved in the business end of it, but they didn't accept his offer. I think he had offered them $4 a unit, but they came back to me and said, "We didn't take it." And I looked at them and I said, "You guys must be mad." This guy had, Fred had worldwide input, right? He could get things. He could get these games from Europe, England. He had offices all over the world. They knocked him back because they wanted more than $4. Like $4 sounded good to me.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, it all fell apart. But Fred, I mean, I never spoke to Fred about this in the past after this, but within a few weeks, these guys went off anyway and sold Piracy to some shonky guy who I'm not going to mention his name because
sure,
he'd probably sue me. But he ripped them off anyway. He took the game, took the rights. So, because Piracy for some reason got all around the world. It was in Europe and shit like that. You'll find it. It's out there. But it got robbed. It got stolen. No money came in. The venture capitalists got nothing. I got nothing. Nobody got anything. Piracy got out there. And Fred rang me up a few months later and said, let's talk about our future relationship.
Mm-hmm.
He is a clever guy, this guy. I'm pretty sure that Fred offered him the lowest dollar on the hope that they wouldn't accept it, knowing that they would kill the company, and then I'd be floating around again waiting to be picked up. Right? There was a lot of things like that going on at the time. So that's exactly what happened. And then I went back and Fred said, you know, I'm going to set you up with offers. You can employ who you want. I think he was probably looking for the same team that put piracy together, but that wasn't going to happen.
Right.
So he set me up with an office, bankrolled the whole business. We called it Fitzroy House, which Fitzroy was the suburb I was living in, and well, where the office was that I'd set up. And he kicked off from there. He paid for development of Bazooka Bill.
Wow.
That's the long-winded story there that got us to that office.
Was it his idea for the game? Was it his concept? And he said, look, I want an army game. Is that pretty much what he said?
Yeah. Well, because Green Beret, right?
Yeah, and they compare it to that, and then it was Russian attack over here. And, you know, in reading about, you know, because I kind of read some of the back history that, you know, some of the Wikipedia talks about, and I know you got to take some of that with a grain of salt, but I know a lot of people want to compare it to Russian attack, or maybe even say that it was, you know, a clone of that. And I got to tell you, I played a lot of Russian attack around that same time. And I never connected the two. I just never did. It wasn't like, hey, this is like Bazooka Bill, or vice versa. When I got Bazooka Bill, I wasn't like, hey, wait a minute, this is just like Russian attack. I just never made the connection. And there's reasons for that we'll get into as we talk here. Very good reasons. But yeah, so was that basically they just wanted a game like that? They wanted a side scroller?
Yep. Fred came to me and he said, well, this is what I want you to do. So I set up this office, and I mean, even down to organizing desks and seats. I mean, this was a funny time. And so I got this office above this friend of mine who I was flying airplanes with, learning to fly with. He was a hairdresser. So he had a hairdressing salon, and he said, look, I got this space upstairs. You know, you could rent that out. Give me $100 a week. And I said, great. And off I went, and I set this office up. And Fred, he'd come down there, and he loved it. He thought this was fantastic, right? And, you know, sort of thing he enjoyed doing. So I employed all these young kids. I put out all these ads for computer programs. The first kid I remember, Brian Post, his name was. So when Brian walked in the door that day, I said, well, listen, Brian, build me a high score table for a game. So, you know, just a matter of typing in your name and adding up, putting a score, and then sorting the score into top to bottom, and you basically get a job. Anyway, he sat there. It took him a few days, but he put together a high score widget, you'd call it these days. We didn't use a widget back in those days. A high score widget, and it took him a while. And in machine code, mind you, you know, you had to learn the tools. And anyway, it was like, okay, Brian, you got a job. And I got a few other kids, and then I employed an artist. It was a girl, a woman, which she turned out to be a policewoman, but that's a whole other story. And so we got Bazooka Bill going, and then me and Fred would sit down, and I don't think I went away and had a look at Green Beret, and he said, I don't want it to be anything like Green Beret. He said, I want it to look like this. He usually spat out the spec, the side scrolling. So I went away and put that together. I sat down and put all that code together, the side scrolling, pulling all that stuff in, and all the sprite work and all that.
So did he have the idea for the character? Did he decide that
Yeah. The big fist was Fred's, and you know, the beret and the tapping foot. That was
Yeah.
It had to be. he wanted all that stuff, but the big fist, I remember, and I said, what's this fist, man? You know, this is stupid, right? No, that's what I want it to be stupid. You know, I want the big fist, the knives, the bazooka. Man, I remember him saying, when the bazooka, everything dies when the bazooka's gone. And that's Bazooka Bill, right? And actually, the truth is, my only input, apart from the code of managing this team of Bazooka Bill, was I gave it the name Bazooka Bill.
Oh, but it's perfect because that's the identity. That's why this game had a face. You know, Russian Attack, Green Beret, that didn't have a face. When the title screen comes up on Bazooka Bill, you get his big face right there, his big dumb face. He's in the airplane and he's so happy. He's killing everybody. And it's like, oh my God, look at this guy. I can remember even as a kid thinking, this dude is a badass. He's running around and he's punching ninjas out with his fist. I mean, he doesn't give two F's. I mean, this is Bazooka Bill coming at you. So it had a face.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, I must admit, I'll take the name. Because I remember even when I said that, yeah, that's Bazooka Bill. And I just put bazooka. I just put Bill on the end of bazooka, right? 2 B's. But his face, Fred's face lit up and went, Bazooka Bill. Yeah, that's what we're going to call it.
Yeah. So when you hear the name, and that's just it. It's like, oh, that's it. It can't be anything else. That's just so right. That's just so right.
And the guy that did the music, Neil Brennan, I can remember Neil, and he did the music. You know.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about him too, because it's got a very iconic soundtrack. It really, and my kids have been telling me to shut up all week. I've been going around singing this. I've just been going around the house singing it, and they're just like, "Stop! Okay, can you stop that?" Or I was like, "No, because Bazooka Bill, I can't stop."
You got that down. That Bazooka Bill, by the way.
Oh man, once I had that Total Recall, once all those memories came flooding back, it was like it was just yesterday. But for some reason, that was a gaming memory that was just lost in the archives of my mind, and I might never have thought about it again. I still can't figure out what of that Zelda sprite got it to trigger in my mind to where I saw Bazooka Bill in my head again. But he just came back, and it hit so hard. I was like, oh my God, what was that game? I loved that game. And I really did. I mean, I was born in 78. So, I mean, I guess I was probably, maybe 7 or 8 at the time when we got the game, because we bought the game new.
You would have been 7 or 8 years old.
And I remember sitting there in the living room with the turd brown carpet and our wood grain TV and the old bread box 64 there in the floor, and playing Bazooka Bill. And lots of other games too, but that one really stood out in my mind, and I can't believe that over time I forgot it. But yeah, the music was really iconic, and now I could play every lick of it on a guitar if you handed it to me. It's all come flooding back now.
Oh, gee, I don't know what we can do with you. But, it's funny you should mention that, because I was watching a show on TV here once in Australia, and it was about these people living on Fraser Island, Fraser Island, which is up in northern New South Wales or Queensland. It's an island of sand. And there was a doco on this family, can't remember what for, but at one point I could hear this song on the TV, and I'm thinking, that's Bazooka Bill, man. And I looked up, and there was a kid that was in the family that they were doing the doco on, and in the background, he was playing Bazooka Bill.
No way.
TV. No, I'll never forget that.
That's fantastic. That's the thing I got to wonder about, because there's other people obviously that remember this game, because in that same video that I found your comment in that led me to contact you, I mean, there were other people talking about the game. There's people that remember this. There's other people having total recalls out there about Bazooka Bill. It's games like that that end up getting these cult freaking followings. They just do, because
weird.
It is, because I think you expressed that it might not have been your favorite piece of work of all time, but it's just to me it was absolutely phenomenal. And at the time, you get a game like that and you're like, oh my God, it's an army guy and he's punching ninjas. I mean, gamers today are so hard to please. We got gamers today out there talking about how Zelda Breath of the Wild was a terrible game. It's like, man, y'all wouldn't have made it in the 80s, because you got one game a year, maybe birthday, Christmas, I don't know, and whatever it was, that was your game for the year. And you better hope it was good. But I was thrilled with Bazooka Bill. I wasn't good enough at it to really get anywhere, but I never finished the game, but I had a ball trying, and he's an army dude. He's punching people out. I didn't get that far, and I can remember flying in the planes, and I remember as a kid wondering, is this game ever going to end? Like, oh my God, I was wondering if I was on an endless loop. because I couldn't get to the end. And it is long, you know, for what it is. Now that I kind of get an idea of the flow of it, it makes more sense to me as an adult.
So you never unearthed General MacArthur?
I didn't, and now I have to. You know, I've actually been playing it since you and I have been corresponding and trying to get my chops back on it.
Yeah, he's there somewhere. I can't remember. Definitely in the tank section somewhere there. You just got to go down somewhere where it doesn't look like anything's happening, and then he just appears. I don't know.
So is it true that he's like hidden in the game? You actually have to find him? He's not just
He just walks out of the forest in the end, and he says, "Thanks, son."
Wow.
And that's it. And that was Fred Milgram. He came up with that one. I said, "Well, how are we going to finish it?" He said, "Here, it's going to." And the sprite was huge, right? He was like, I think it was 10 sprites high. No, he wouldn't have been 10, but he was a few sprites high. I mean, Bazooka Bill was tiny next to General MacArthur, right?
Wow.
And he walks out of somewhere and he just says, "Thanks, son," like a balloon. "Thanks, son." And Bazooka Bill's jumping up and down, you know.
Of course.
Yeah, he was elated. He was just to meet General MacArthur that was his world life fascination.
See, I love Bill because he's thrilled through the whole thing. You know, I mean, when he stops, you know, he's smiling like he's tapping his foot. He's like, "I'm cool. You know, I got ninjas and they're causing problems, but I'm cool. I'm gonna start punching them again here any second." He's just thrilled to be doing the whole thing that he's doing.
Yeah, well, Andy, you know what? You got the whole vibe of it because that's exactly what it's all about. It was never meant to be clever, you know. It was always just an entertainment. That was what it was all about. Yeah, but that was the end. I mean, I ended up, before that game was finished, my wife separated, left me. She ran off with some other bloke.
Oh.
My life sort of fell to pieces. I had 2 children, so I left her in the house that we owned, and I went and lived. I rented a place over the road from the office where we were building Bazooka Bill, so I could just walk to work, and I would sit there and, you know, wonder what the shit was going on in my life and get all these other people to make Bazooka Bill, finish Bazooka Bill, basically. So, unfortunately, that was the backstory.
But I mean, how much more human does that make this whole production of this game? Again, people today, and the way they, you know, critique the hell out of games, there are living, breathing people behind the creation of these things, and they work harder than most of these people that complain in forums are ever going to work in their lives. It really struck a chord with me that while that might have been a tough point in your life, that it was going on while you were making this game. So it's just, and a lot of musicians I think have the same kind of things go on. They create things out of, you know, tough times, or, you know, whatever it is that, you know, influences or inspires. So that just puts this whole extra face on this game that, I mean, if you had told me this stuff at 8 years old, I probably wouldn't have known what to think about it. But it's just fascinating. I mean, it's absolutely fascinating to me.
That's exactly, well, it was at the time for me too. And funnily enough, because then we put Bazooka Bill on the Sinclair Spectrum too. I had this other team of guys that were doing, because the Commodore was the 6502 machine code. I had these other guys doing the Z80 stuff on the Spectrum, and I had this artist there, which was this girl that I'd employed. And funny enough, she turned out to be a policeman, and they were trying to arrest some people in the street. And actually, I knew a couple of these guys, but they were watching a couple of people in the street for some other nefarious things that were going on. And one day I'm there at work, can't remember her name now, but she pointed to me. She said, "Clive, come and have a look at this." And we looked out the window. There was a friend of mine, this guy that I knew, and the police had pinned him against the wall. And I never saw her again. She just packed her bags and left. So she was like some sort of, you know, snitch or something that was working for me, that I didn't have a clue what was going on. So all the artwork for the Spectrum end of Bazooka Bill, I'm not sure what I can't even remember how I sorted all that out, but we managed to stitch that one up too, and we got it out there. And there is a Spectrum version. I can't remember ever playing it myself. And I even employed a couple of guys from England, and this was a scam that some of these software houses, even way back then, would pull off. You'd bring in young kids from overseas, and because they had no friends or nothing else to do, they didn't know anyone. They would just work 24/7.
Wow.
Which is, when you think about it, it was a shocking sort of thing. These guys, I'd look after them, and they would introduce me to other brilliant things that I was probably needing at the time, since I was all of a sudden alone. And I remember one of these kids introduced me to Mozart and things like that, which was pretty fulfilling for me at the time, and sort of put my head in different spaces. But it was a weird time back then. It was probably just my life was weird. Nothing weird about the time at all. But there are some of the emotions that were behind Bazooka Bill, from my point of view, anyway.
Well, you mentioned the Spectrum, and that kind of segues into another question I had. Was there ever at any point plans for Bazooka Bill to hit any other computer types or home consoles of any kind?
No, there wasn't. And we were doing stuff on other computers. I was also putting programs together on the Game Boy. Early Game Boy. Yeah. So back then, I would have put together Solitaire. Mm-hmm. So, just the first Game Boy. And then also the Game Gear, the Sega Game Gear. Mm-hmm. I put together a compendium of board games like chess and checkers. But Bazooka Bill, I think that's Bazooka Bill, that's as far as he went. Poor old Bazooka Bill.
Poor old Bazooka Bill. Yeah, I was wondering what else you had worked on after the fact, because it's like, where do you go from Bazooka Bill? You can go anywhere you want at that point. So Game Boy, that's also very fascinating stuff.
Yeah, that stuff. And it was pretty. And also there was some Japanese computers that came out, which we put a lot of effort into as well. MSX, they were called, but they didn't go anywhere. And also the Japanese PC. We tried to do some stuff for them too. But
I need to get my hands on an MSX. There's some business on there I need to take care of. Other versions of games that we didn't have here, that I just really have to experience. It's about the versions, man. Now I want to see the Bazooka Bill on the Spectrum. I'll have to get a hold of a ROM of that so that I can actually do a compare and contrast, because those kind of things just fascinate me. I feel like I'm saying fascinate a lot, but I'm fascinated right now.
The graphics software that I wrote would be in there somewhere, although that sort of just got vaporized at some point. But you should definitely check the MSX machines. They failed for some reason. I enjoyed those computers and writing some software for them, but they were tricky to get stuff onto. So everything that I did for MSX just disappeared, because the whole MSX stuff just vanished.
Yeah, that makes sense. They launched Rambo on the NES, and I believe it was '87. And the way Rambo had his weapons at the top of the screen, that always, to me, looked like Bazooka Bill's weapon line. Is it possible that you might have influenced other creators indirectly with that game?
Oh, damn right. That's exactly how it all worked back then. People were definitely watching what other people were doing and getting ideas and going one step further. This is what kept Fred Milgram going, because he used to say to me, he said, look, we just keep going and we stay one step ahead of everybody else, and then we'll stay alive. And that was his attitude. To be honest with you, it's true. If you got enough stuff going on where you can do it in-house and create stuff, and you're always going to have a market. Yeah. And as soon as you slow down and fall off the wall, then someone else will come along and knock you off, right?
Yep.
There's a lot of guys from Melbourne House and Beam Software that went off, and Tantalus and Taurus Games and all these guys. These are guys I used to work with. We used to sit around all day. Fred had a great business acumen where there were couches, and every Friday he'd supply us with beers and pizzas and packets of potato chips. And, you didn't get to work at 9 o'clock and go home at 6. You just came to work when you wanted to work. Mm-hmm. And because we loved what we did, we were always there. And that's why it hammered out so many great games.
At the point that things slowed down for you and you stopped doing all that, was there ever a point where you wanted to get back into, or that you did get back into it?
Well, no, I think probably as far as gaming goes, I remember going to see Fred. I said, Fred, I can't do this anymore. It's all over, buddy. Yeah. And you might as well take all these guys I've got here working. And he did. I got them all jobs. I said, don't worry, boys. I'm shutting down Fitzroy House, and you guys have all got jobs. You can go and work for Melbourne House.
Yeah.
Right? And for Beam Software. And so they all went off there, and, you know, the good ones kicked on, but that was the end of it. And well, after that, then I wrote some stuff. I did the Game Gear and the Game Boy Gear stuff.
Yeah, after that, was there any point that you wanted to get back into it again?
No, not the game stuff. No, it's sort of I'd moved on. I was starting to get into. Well, I still write code now, but I don't write games. Although piracy, I've got here on my phone a version of piracy, which is pretty cool, but I haven't managed to finish it. These guys came to me with the spec. Actually, their spec was they had it all cut out on pieces of paper, little triangles, and they said, "There's aeroplanes, Clive, right? They're airplanes, and they're going to do this and they're going to do that." And I looked at them and said, "What, do you think you're going to make a game out of this crap? You know, like airplanes, that's stupid. Why don't you come up with something that makes sense, like pirates, something some people can relate to, passionate about, you know?" And they went, "Oh, pirates." I said, "Yeah, pirates. They didn't even have a rule book, right? And they didn't know the rules of the game or anything. But what they put together was quite good. Look, to be honest with you, I found building piracy I really loved. I really loved sitting down with these guys, teaching them how to draw. These are artists, and I'm going, oh, and they looked at it, and the Commodore 64, I think the pixels were, I mean, these guys look at it and go, "What? Where's the dots?" I said, "No, there's no dots, man. This is the matrix. It's 24 by 36 or something, and this is how big they're going to be, man. And you got to make a face out of this." And, you know, amazingly, these guys pulled it off. And I taught them how to use all the software that was available at that point to do it all. And they pulled it off, and they made this incredible. And I've still got the graphics to this day. And what they drew back then for the Commodore 64 was brilliant. Those guys were very clever. I couldn't put a team together after we built piracy, unfortunately, with those guys, because they all went off their different ways, and I went off my direction, and it all fell to pieces. And to be honest with you, I had a big problem with that. When they couldn't sell piracy to turn a profit, I was a little bit pissed off.
I can imagine, yeah.
I cried when I finished piracy. There was so much work involved. I sat there, I was on my own, and I had a bit of a tear. A lot of effort went into that game.
Yeah, I'm saying, I mean, the work that went into, at any level, in any era of gaming, the work going into game creation is just, I mean, staggering. And again, you know, I've got this memory of this Bazooka Bill guy, and never actually knowing the whole story about how he came to be. And this is just, I mean, it's absolutely fascinating. You know, things the game does right. You know, you keep your weapon after death. I thought was really cool because, you know, it's a little forgiveness in an otherwise unforgiving world. You know, Bazooka Bill's having the worst day. He's got ninjas coming at him from every freaking direction, and yet he still manages to smile. So, you know, it's got that going for it. And also the fact that it shifts genres. I mean, you move into this shoot 'em up mode in the plane, and I've got to think, I mean, hell, I know I was there. For the time, that was pretty rare. I mean, a game is either this type of game or it's that type of game. You didn't have games that just did it all like that. You weren't going to get off the ground and get in an airplane and start shooting helicopters down, you know. Very few games pulled that off. That impressed me then, and it even impresses me now, the fact that this game goes from side-scroller to shoot 'em up in the drop of a hat and back again. You know, you would buy games back then, and I think about games on Atari 2600, stuff that was just underwhelming for the time, because some of it was even unplayable. You know, it just wasn't like, God, what do I do with this? I got one button here and it doesn't do anything. you know, that can be pretty frustrating. But then you get a game like Bazooka Bill, and again, that's a game that I bought brand new. I can remember. And you get it home, and it does everything. I mean, the dude's got a flamethrower. The dude's got a giant fist. He's knocking out ninjas, and it's like, okay, now we can work with this. You know, this is gonna fly. This dog's gonna hunt right here. And looking back from today, it can be just that much more, because it's like, man, this game was really pulling some weight. Because the Commodore, man, it was what it was for the time, but you know, to scale today, 64K, that's not a lot of beef under the hood.
That's true. That's true. We, you know, to put programs into that small, I mean, that was part of the problem. It was always trying to, how much can we get into this? But I mean, we would rob memory from wherever we could find it.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, we would. We'd have to. Our Spectrum was only 48.
Yeah, which I can't even imagine. And I have no experience with the Spectrum. I want some experience with it. I mean, even now I look back at stuff from back then. I still have an Atari 1040 ST computer. That was something I played a lot back in the 80s. I just love going back to that stuff, not just for the nostalgia, but it's just something so satisfying about playing on these old platforms. It's hard to explain. It's even harder to explain to gamers of today. You know, that's why my YouTube channel does so many different things and looks at so many different aspects of gaming. And if anything, maybe I'm trying to be too many things, but man, I've been in the game for a minute, you know, and there's just so many different levels of things that I can enjoy, whether we're talking a game of wizardry on an old IBM, or if we're talking about the newest Call of Duty installment. So.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you know, I mean, games these days, I mean, they're movies, man. I mean, I think Bazooka Bill budget would have probably been, you know, 100,000.
Mm-hmm. Golly.
100 grand. I mean, now they're millions, big millions of them, you know.
To really think about that.
Call of Duty, I mean, you know, those games, forget about it. I mean, it takes. I mean, those things just, they never end, because they've just got to keep churning out, grinding out gold, you know. And the effort and the amount of money and the time that goes into it. And the 3D back then when we were making games, what?
Right.
I mean, we used to write 3D code and stuff to play around and see what we could do. But it was like trying to peel a lemon, you know. It just didn't work, man. Everything was too slow. Nothing, and you didn't have enough memory. So now there's so much memory. I mean, memory was so expensive back then. That's why you didn't have enough. But
right.
Now memory is so cheap, and now there's so much memory that I don't know, man. You could do anything now. You could. This was what we used to say to one another way back then. You can do anything with software, and that's true. With software, you can do anything. And, you know, I still stand by that. I mean, I still write code, and I can sit here and go, well, what do you want to do now, Clive? And, you know, you go, okay, I want to try and let's have a crack at this. And especially these days, more than ever, you can do it. You can do it, man. You know, if you've got the knowledge and you know how to do stuff, you can do it.
So did you ever think about making another game? Like present day? Have you thought about it?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, the opportunity would be one. I mean, I'm 65, 66 years old now, Andy. Right? I'm not a young man anymore, but you know, it's software and these things that keep my mind active. And I'm better now than I was when I made Bazooka Bill. I'm just probably, I tell you what, I'm not as fast as I was back then. That's why old men like me, you get thrown on the heap when it comes to software, because you're not quick, but you're still as sharp as ever. But you're not as quick when it comes to sitting there coding. We didn't have YouTube. We didn't have the internet back then. Yep. Everything, all the code we wrote, we created ourselves.
Yep. I mean, you were gods among men. You were shaping worlds. You were creating frickin' worlds. And that is such a large weapon to wield there. That's just...
Yeah, it was...
Again, to scale, for the time, just thinking about what that took. I mean, the scope of that is just mind splitting. I mean, you got people today now that throw something together and they've got it up on Steam and a digital download for $1 a piece, and you know, they do it in no time, and they have nowhere near the money in it even back then that, you know, that you had in the development of these things. So it's just like
you had to create it. I mean, I look at all these people now, coders and stuff, and they just, most of the time it's all plagiarized stuff. You know, they've robbed it off other people. And
that's
stuff
right.
Like that.
There is a lot of
there was
that.
There was no one that we could steal. We had to come up with it ourselves. So definitely, we'd sit there and plan this stuff out and go, "Will that work?" You know, why doesn't that work? And that was usually the question. Why doesn't it work? And we'd fight our way through it. You didn't get on the internet and say, "Oh, what happened to the last guy that tried this?" You know, it was like we had to do it ourselves. The answers were within us. Original thought. That's what was happening back then. That's for sure.
You know, I actually started jotting down some notes here earlier today on just this is a timeline from my perspective for what could happen. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but what could happen. Because we got Kickstarter now. You can crowdfund these things. I think there are people that would rally behind, because you got whole Commodore 64, you know, fan bases in these little groups and pockets online and forums and what have you. And then, you know, you got one for Bazooka Bill. If you made a current gen reimagining of this game, you kickstart now hear me out. You kickstart a new Bazooka Bill. Okay. There's physical extras for higher tier kickstarting. And then it hits Steam, right? We start small. It hits Steam. We got a digital download of this thing, right? So we got it on PC. Then eventually we get digital releases on console, eventually move it to Nintendo Switch. It hits that eShop. Next thing you know, Bazooka Bill gets an amiibo. They put him on the Smash Ultimate roster, and he takes his rightful spot as an MVP game character for all time. Boom! That's what happens.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, I love the way you put that. But I saw there was some guy even put a Bazooka Bill song together on YouTube.
Oh, no way. I got to see that.
He's even put his face on Bazooka Bill's face, which I thought, hang on a minute, you're not as handsome as Bazooka Bill. No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, who is? I mean, come on. I mean, the guy's got that chiseled chin. I mean, you could carve a roast on it, and he's grinning ear to ear. You know, he knows what he's doing. This is a game that I'm very excited to share with everybody, and also how I remembered about it too. But then you come along in this interview here, and it's spiraling out of control into just this level of coolness that I never thought it would hit. So it's just absolutely fantastic.
Funny. That is funny, and you know, like, funny enough, we had, because I worked, Fred would bring in these, you know, early Game Boy stuff. We had the first consoles here in Australia. Would have been after Bazooka Bill, but because I'd got divorced, you know, Fred was a little bit upset about that because he knew that it was going to upset our relationship.
Sure.
I was going to change, right? He'd worked it out before me, right? I hadn't even considered that, but he'd worked it out that shit, you know, like, this guy's going to go off the rails, right? I had a house, and rented another house, and my kids would show up. My son, you know, who's a very successful IT guy here in Australia.
Oh, wow, okay.
Fred gave me the first Nintendo console. I can't remember what model they were. He said, "Here, man, take this home, you know, play with your kids on the weekends." And so, you know, my kids were, especially my son, he was a little bit older than my daughter, and he used to come to my work when I was building stuff for Fred. He'd come and sit there and play games while I was building software. And so, you know, he'd play on these games. You know, I mean, we were privileged back then because Fred ended up with this huge contract with Nintendo, because the way they worked out, if you wanted to make games for Nintendo and you weren't Japanese, you had to do a specific sort of process. And
I don't doubt that, yeah.
It was all about cartridges. You know, like, all right, you want to write some software? Well, you can have this many cartridges, right? And, you know, so we'd sit there and I mean, basically Fred was reverse engineering the whole number so he could become part of the whole process, right? He was trying to work out how it all works, and, you know, ended up with a great deal with Nintendo. And knocked out stuff for Nintendo for years, because they were the leaders, and then the Japanese, of course, got very good at making their own games.
Sure,
they didn't need anyone else.
Well, man, this has just been fantastic. And again, I didn't want to take up too much of your time, but I can't thank you enough for talking with me about this. And yeah, I'm going to be all on that Bazooka Bill. I think we're going to do a future live stream here on the show to showcase the game. And depending on the time difference, I don't know, you may or may not be awake at the time that we do something like that, but feel free to pop into the chat too, because I mean, we do a lot of interactive live streams where developers will come on and do Q&A with the people that are watching, and we usually have a good time with that. So I would like to do another spot on Bazooka Bill and do some live play. I think that'd be a good time.
Oh, we could do that. I'd love to do that, by the way, because I'm as passionate as you are, Andy, about all this stuff. Anyway, lovely to speak to you, buddy.
Yeah, just absolutely cool stuff. And, I can't thank you enough for making time to talk to me tonight, and for making Bazooka Bill, because, my God, I mean, I just did not think after I had that epiphany and that remembrance of this game that, within the hour I would be communicating with the man that was behind the scenes of making the dadgum thing. It's just absolutely incredible. Absolutely incredible.
Yeah, well, that's something that you've put together, and I take my hat off to you, buddy, for that. And it's been a pleasure anyway. And thank you, Andy, for your time and your passion. Very
absolutely,
nice.
Absolutely. If you can't count on me for passion, who can you count on? Well, I will. I will let you get back to it, and I will be in touch with you, my friend. Thanks again so much for being here.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
It leaves me without words how cool this is. So Bazooka Bill, what did you think about it? Have you ever played this game? Have you ever heard of this game? I think that we will do a live stream in the not too distant future, and perhaps we will also have Clive Barrett join us for that as well, for Q&A in the chat, as we have done with other games in the past. Still just so much to talk about. I could talk for hours about this. Again, this was a game that I played a lot. It's a punishing, brutal game, but man, great memories with this game. As a person that actually bought it new back in the day, this was just a treat. And I hope you enjoyed everything that you saw and got to listen to here on this episode today. I want to thank Clive Barrett again for being with us on the show. Super cool guy, super cool experience. And again, when this popped back into my mind and I remembered this game, I had no idea that, shortly enough I'd be speaking with the man that made it. So this was just an incredible experience. Out of everything that's happened on this show, this definitely ranks up there as one of the coolest. Let me know something in the comments section about what you thought about everything that you saw here today, because you know that I love getting a conversation going with you right here on the Emceemur Show, something that we do a lot of. Hope you're going to drop a like on this video, and I hope that you did like this video. Most importantly, if you have not already done so, I hope you're going to subscribe to the Emceemur Show and be a part of our nation, because we're rising up all the fantastic things that we do right here on the show. You need to be a part of it. Make sure that you smack that notification bell so you're always the first to know when new content goes live, because you know that I love making it for you each and every time. Content just like this. Sometimes it's content we don't even know we have coming our way. Vintage gaming memories and super duper surprises. Emceemur signing out for this episode, and I will see each and every one of you again next time.